So today we'll be working in my workbook called Paul's First Two Missionary Journeys, and it covers Acts 13 through 18:22. In this workbook, we've studied already about Paul's first missionary journey, which is shown on page 4. On this journey, on this journey, Paul and Barnabas travel first to the island of Cyprus and convince a proconsul that Jesus is the Messiah. Then they travel to the mainland, directly up to the mountain region of Galatia, probably due to a health condition of Paul's, and he tells us this in the book of Galatians. Paul preached in a synagogue in Galatian Antioch and having great success. However, the high-ranking Jews got jealous and stirred up persecution against Paul and Barnabas, having them expelled from the city. A similar situation happened in Iconium. In Lystra, Paul healed a lame man, which caused the city to think that they were the gods Zeus and Hermes. When Paul insisted that they were mere men and not gods, he then was stoned and thrown out of the city. After traveling to Derbe, they then traveled back through all these cities, setting up elders of the new believers in each city. Before the second missionary trip, Paul and Barnabas traveled down to Jerusalem, as there was a major problem that the leaders of the church had to decide upon. This was whether Gentiles could become Christians without first becoming Jewish and being circumcised. Without Paul's and Peter's testimony, I doubt it would have resulted in the belief that Gentiles could become Christians without being circumcised, as traditions and all prior teachings would have pointed otherwise. Sometime later, Paul and Barnabas decide to go on the second missionary journey. Their disagreement about taking John Mark results in Paul taking Silas and Barnabas taking John Mark. The book of Acts follows the journey of Paul and Silas at this point. Now looking at the map on page 5, which is I have on the front screen here, Paul and Silas travel through the churches of Cilicia and then to the city of Derbe and Lystra. In Lystra, we meet for the first time a young man named Timothy. Timothy joins Paul and Silas's missionary journey. From Lystra, they travel to Troas, where Paul has a dream about Macedonia. He believes this is God telling him to travel to Macedonia to preach. So they continue to travel to Philippi. Down by the river, they meet several ladies in prayer. There they meet Lydia, a seller of purple, who becomes a believer in Christ. Paul and his companions stay at her house for a while. Our story now today continues in the city of Philippi, and I will now go to chapter 6, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6. Chapter 6, Paul and Silas in jail, Acts 16 through 40.
Once when we were going to the place of prayer, we were met by a female slave who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. She earned a great deal of money for her owners by fortune telling.
Where was the place of prayer again?
Outside the city gate to the river.
Right, down by the river, yeah. How was this female slave able to predict the future?
I can't read my writing. Uncle, what?
She had a spirit in her.
Yeah, I can't. Uncle, something about a spirit, but I can't read.
She had a spirit in her, and it would have been an evil spirit, not a good spirit, because good spirits don't do this. So it would have been an evil spirit, although it's not identified as such. Therefore, this was not a clever scheme, but an actual unclean spirit. If it was just a clever scheme, then she could not have been healed. Okay, makes logical sense. Was this female slave successful in her predictions?
Yeah.
Do you understand how that can be? How spirits can predict things?
No, that's what's confusing to me.
The reason is, think of it this way. Satan has been at it for a very long time. And of course, his demons or spirits, evil spirits, were angels that fell. and are now part of his dominion. And so they've been at it for a long time. So they're able to know what's going to happen based on just general conclusions. They know how, if a person came, is this the man I should marry? Well, if it's not the man that they should marry, they're going to say yes, because they want evil to keep continuing. And so these things, so they can see various things going on and be able to generally predict better than those of us who only have what's going on in our eyesight to see. Get that?
Yeah. Okay. I never even thought about it like that. Yeah.
So they're doing it based on logical premise and knowledge they may have of all the people involved. So now we have a problem. If, as we see from the next page, the slave girl proclaimed that Paul and his companions are servants to the Most High God, then she's proclaiming the truth. So therefore, how would we know if we met a prophet that proclaims positive words about God, that they are false prophets or soothsayers and not true prophets of God? And here are some ways to tell the difference. Because she's going to proclaim that they are prophets from God, and that is the truth. So then how do you not know that she's not got a good spirit leading her and not an evil spirit? She's not a prophet from God versus been led by an evil spirit. And the reason is diviners, false prophets, fortune tellers, etc., ultimately perform signs and wonders in order for you to give them money. Prophets of God are not going to do it for money.
Right.
Okay, so that's a big one there. Their messages mostly focus on materialism, money, self-glory, rather than character and relationship with God or anything Christ-centered. When we see prophets of God talk, they're talking about the overhauled God picture of what's going to happen. And then they teach that you will receive salvation and deliverance from your problems when you seed or give money to them or their institution. However, salvation and deliverance doesn't come because you're given money. So the more money you give to a fortune teller, the more they tell you, etc. And that is definitely then not from God. Because most of the time, what you want to hear from God is not most of the time good stuff anyway. I mean, what you want to hear, what you're going to hear.
Right.
Often a prophet of a God is not going to tell you positive things because, our world is so evil.
Yeah. She followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God who are telling you the way to be saved." She kept this up for many days. Finally, Paul became so annoyed that he turned around and said to the spirit, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her." At that moment, the spirit left her.
Right. Now, in a sense, you almost see a conflict in the girl because the evil spirit is not going to be so persistent about these are servants of the Most High God. Listen to them. Listen to them. That's counterintuitive. An evil spirit would want you not to listen to them. But the girl is fighting back almost. She's knowing what the evil is saying. And so she's fighting back. And so she's being persistent. And although Paul is annoyed, he's annoyed with the spirit. And of course, it's the voice of the spirit. But, did this servant girl tell the truth about Paul and his companions?
Yes.
Did this happen only once or several days?
Many days.
Why did Paul decide to cleanse her of this unclean spirit?
He was so annoyed by her.
Right. Was he able to cleanse the girl of the unclean spirit?
Yes.
Why would Paul become annoyed with the girl telling the truth of he and his companions?
It wasn't from God.
Right. It wasn't from God. And he would much rather people understood what he was saying by the words, not, it's not a famous actor kind of awe and respect that he wanted. He wanted people to go by wisdom, not by feelings. Do you get it?
Yeah.
If he knew it was an unclean spirit, why did Paul not heal her on the first day?
These next two questions was hard for me to think and understand how to explain that. I've never had this analytical thinking.
Well,
so maybe you can help me on that.
questions. I'm thinking, well, if you knew, we didn't fix it then. Well,
Yeah.
what I would say is that there was a lot of evil going on at that time, a lot of things, and he wasn't told by God to heal her.
Mhm.
They don't heal everybody; they heal who God tells them to heal.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. See, when you say it makes more sense, but I don't know why I just have a hard time thinking that way. And then until you say it, that was clear. But to me, my brain is stuck. How
Oh,
to
no
explain
problem,
that?
no problem.
So you
If it
can
was
help me
an
with the
unclean,
next question.
yeah, if it was an unclean spirit that was inside her, why would this spirit tell the truth about Paul and his companions?
Well,
I
it's
don't
like
know
what you
that they,
said earlier.
right. I don't know
Yeah.
that it would be the unclean spirit that would do that because it's counterproductive. His
Yeah.
whole issue is to try to make people stay away from God, not follow God. And he would never do that. But I think it's her fighting him on this. And so that was also probably the reason why Paul sees her as someone to cleanse because she's fighting it as much as she can.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. There's some questions I have a hard time, or
Oh, no
opinions.
problem. Yeah.
I never had to think before. But yeah, when her owners realized that their hope of making people was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to face the authorities. They brought them before the magistrates and said, "These men are Jews and are throwing our city into an uproar by advocating customs unlawful for us, Romans, to accept or practice."
Once the unclean spirit was removed, was the servant girl able to predict the future?
No.
What did the owners of the servant girl do to Paul and Silas once their ability to make money had disappeared?
Drag them into the marketplace to face the authorities.
Right. Yeah, nobody says anything about the girl. Aside from being the leaders of the evangelistic group, what did the masters of the servant girl identify Paul and Silas as?
Jews.
Right, which in this and they were correct too. In this evangelistic group, some would probably look more Jewish than others. Paul was Jewish, even though he was raised in the Roman city of Tarsus. Silas was also a Hellenistic Jew. It's not clear if Luke was Jew or Gentile. Timothy, since his father was Greek, would have been considered a Gentile. Since the slave owners singled Paul and Silas out as Jews, they must have looked more Jewish than the others. What was the slave owners' accusations against Paul and Silas?
Advocating customs unlawful for Romans to accept or practice.
We know what the customs that are unlawful are, as they are listed in Acts 17, 6 and 7. They dragged Jason and some other believers before the city officials, shouting, "These men who have caused trouble all over the world have now come here. They are all defying Caesar's decree, saying that there's another king, one called Jesus." So it was unlawful for the Romans to believe that there was another king other than the Roman king.
Yeah. The crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, and the magistrates ordered them to be stripped and beaten with rods. After they had been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. When he received these orders, he put them in the inner cell and fastened their feet in the stocks. How did they go to the bathroom? They were
I
stuck.
don't know that there's a way. I don't think they have that option. Did the crowd join in on the attack against Paul and Silas?
Yeah,
What happened to Paul and Silas?
they were beaten with rods.
Yeah. Did they have a trial?
No.
This became important later, actually. Was the jailer to give these men special attention?
Yes.
What was he to do?
Guard them carefully, put them in the inner circle cell, and fasten their feet in the stock.
This would be like maximum security prison.
Yeah.
The problem
Yeah.
here is that the slave owners, the crowd, and the magistrates all did not know that both Paul and Silas were Roman citizens. It'd be logical that all these people would not know this, as only 5 to 10% of the Roman populace had citizenship. We know Paul had citizenship from birth. However, we don't know how or when Silas became a citizen. Being a Roman citizens, they had rights that non-citizens did not have. Among the rights of a Roman citizen was the freedom from being beaten without trial and the right to be tried before the emperor, other than in a court of law. This comes really, really, really important in Paul's life and why he is uniquely picked for the position God put him in. Being a Roman citizen from birth, he can only be tried by the emperor. I mean, he has to have a trial. He can't just be hung. And of course, later in his life, this is what why he ends up going to Rome, because nobody can try him other than Caesar himself, because he's a Roman citizen. And God used him because of that, because he can speak two languages, Hebrew and Greek, and he is known as a Greek and a Hebrew. He was grown up in the Hebrew schools, so he knows the Testament really well. And he's a Roman citizen, which gets him through a lot of things that God wanted him to get through. So it's really kind of interesting. Just like Moses was specially picked because of his background, so was Paul. Anyway, that was kind of a preview, but that's okay.
That's good. I like to preview. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly, there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison was shaken. At once, all the prison doors fell open, and everyone's chains came loose. The jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted, "Don't harm yourself. We are all here." That was amazing.
Yeah. What were Paul and Silas doing around midnight?
Praying and singing hymns to God.
What happened at midnight?
A violent earthquake.
Yeah, it was a violent earthquake which shook the foundations of the prison, right?
Yeah.
What were all the things that happened in the prison?
Prison doors flew open and everyone's chains were loose.
Right, right. What was the jailer about to do to himself when he thought the prisoners escaped?
Kill himself.
Yeah, because he's responsible. If they're gone, he's going to be killed. And so he'd rather do it on his own accord.
Yeah.
And what did Paul tell him?
Don't harm yourself. We are all here.
Imagine that. If I was in jail and the doors opened, I think I'd leave.
Yep.
I don't think I'd
Sure.
stick around.
No. The jailer called out for light, rushed in, and fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He then brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all the others in his house.
So Paul must have gotten information somehow to God said, stay there. Because, this is the result of him staying there, where in all other cases, when angels let them go, they leave. Did the jailer verify what Paul told him?
Yeah,
What did the jailer do to Paul and Silas?
brought them out.
Yeah, he brought them out of the prison. What did the jailer ask Paul and Silas?
What must I do to be saved?
Who else was saved other than the jailer?
Others in his household.
How do we know that this earthquake was a supernatural event?
Because all the chains came loose.
Yeah, and it only struck the jail, and only certain things happened. The prison was open and everybody's chains came loose. If this was a supernatural event, then wouldn't these two things tell you that you are to walk out of the prison? So why did
Yeah.
Paul and Silas stay?
Maybe the Holy Spirit told them to stay so the jailers wouldn't kill himself.
Right. And maybe that's it. Maybe they've already met the jailer and realized he was a kind man. All kinds of things we don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wish you had more information, but there you go.
At that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. Then immediately he and all his household were baptized. The jailer brought them into his house and set a meal before them. He was filled with joy because he had come to believe in God, he and his whole household.
What first happened when the jailer took Paul and Silas from the prison?
Wash their wounds.
And after Paul and Silas' wounds were washed, then what next happened?
and he and all his household were baptized.
Yeah. What was the third event that happened?
Set a meal before them.
How could the jailer have made such a complete change of heart and belief in such a short time? Consider all that was done to Paul and Silas.
Stripped and beaten.
What did Paul and Silas do in jail?
Praying and singing hymns.
And what supernaturally happened?
Earthquake, doors opened, and chains fell off.
And what did Paul say?
Don't harm yourself. We are all here.
Right. What a strange and unusual event.
All I can think of is the J6ers if that would have happened today.
Mm-hmm.
When it was daylight, the magistrates sent their officers to the jailer with the order, release those men. The jailer told Paul, the magistrates have ordered that you and Silas be released. Now you can go. Leave, go in peace.
The jailer had taken them out of prison, treated their wounds, and gave them a meal. And yet, did Paul and Silas leave the prison?
No.
Did the magistrates come or did they send their officers?
Magistrates sent their officers.
Although we don't know the reason why the magistrates just allowed Paul and Silas to be released, this was not uncommon for the day. The rulers would have dissidents thoroughly beat up for causing a commotion, often without hearing their side, then release them the next day as examples to others. Therefore, not a lot of the ruler's time was wasted with trials or hearing cases. Did the jailer relay this information to Paul and Silas?
Yes.
If Paul and Silas were going to be released the next day, why did God send the earthquake?
To save the jailer.
Yes, exactly, to save the jailer. Personal, Paul and Silas never once complained to the jailer about the unjust treatment they received. They even sang in the prison despite all the pain they must have been suffering. Would you be strong enough in your faith to be able to do all this? I'm not sure I would. I'm thankful that our faith is not tested like this. However, there are many in other parts of the world that are. This actually resembles a lot of the J6ers.
Exactly. That's what I wrote down here, J6ers.
Right. They sang in prison despite pain they're suffering, the strength of their faith. It's their faith that, that's going to stand out one day. Their faith will stand out.
Yeah. But Paul said to the officers, they beat us publicly without a trial, even though we are Roman citizens, and threw us into prison. And now do they want to get rid of us quickly? No, let them come themselves and escort us out.
Did Paul or Silas complain when they were arrested?
No.
Did they complain when they were beat?
No.
However, what is his complaint now?
About the treatment they received.
Right. Because, they're kind of sliding it under the rug. They're standing up for Roman citizenship. Looking again at the notes regarding Roman citizens on page 85, what did the magistrates do wrong regarding Paul and Silas?
Beat them without a trial.
Right. Why do you think that Paul and Silas did not reveal their Roman citizenship earlier?
They didn't have a chance to.
Yeah, that's precisely correct. Paul and Silas had no way of proving their citizenship. Why would the people involved believe that they were telling the truth?
Maybe their name.
There was a lot more belief that people generally told the truth back then. We don't allow anybody to tell us something without proving it. And that's the only thing I can come with is, Jesus was born from a virgin, but he has no proof of it. He was born in Bethlehem, but he has no proof of it. And people accepted what he said. It's kind of like, those days, people assumed other people were telling the truth.
Yeah.
What did Paul want the magistrates to do?
Escort us out of prison.
Paul later writes about this event, 1 Thessalonians 2:2. We had previously suffered and been treating outrageously in Philippi, as you know. But with the help of our God, we dared to tell you his gospel in the face of strong opposition.
The officers reported this to the magistrates, and when they heard that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens, they were alarmed. They came to appease them and escorted them from the prison, requesting them to leave the city. After Paul and Silas came out of the prison, they went to Lydia's house and where they met with the brothers and sisters and encouraged them. Then they left.
Right. Why were the magistrates alarmed that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens?
They would be in trouble for how they treated them.
Right. This was a strict rule. If you treated Roman citizens wrong, you could be held liable and killed yourself. Now, there's only 4 to 6% of the whole population who were Roman citizens, but they had rights that nobody else did. Did the magistrates come personally to escort Paul and Silas out of prison?
Yes.
More than just escort them, the magistrates came to
Appease them.
What do you think the magistrates did to appease Paul and Silas?
Being nice to them.
Be nice to them. I'm sorry, we didn't know you were Roman citizens. We were just trying to keep the peace and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
The one request that the magistrates had for Paul and Silas was what?
To leave the city.
Instead of leaving right away, where did Paul and Silas go?
Lydia's house.
Right. Notice the last words of verse 40. Then they left. Apparently, Luke, the writer of the book of Acts, stayed in Philippi for a time. He is there when Paul arrives on his third missionary journey and travels with Paul at that point. So now it's not we, but they after this point for Luke for a while. So we come to the crossword. Boy, this one looks a little easier than some of the past ones I've done. What time of day did Paul and Silas pray and sing hymns?
Midnight.
5, the jailer fastened their feet in
Stock.
Good. 7, the slave owners dragged Paul and Silas into the
Marketplace.
And 9, after being beaten with rods, Paul and Silas were thrown in
Prison.
11, the slave owners called Paul and Silas
Jews.
And 12, thinking that the prisoners escaped, the who was about to kill himself.
Jailer.
Okay, 1 down. Who had come into person and released Paul and Silas from jail?
Magistrate.
2, Paul and Silas should not have been beaten before a trial because they were
Roman.
citizens. 4, it was not just the jailer, but his
household
as well that was saved. 6, there was a female
slave
who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. Number 8, what suddenly shook the prison?
Earthquake.
And 10, where was the place of prayer?
River.
Yeah. All righty. So we're done with this chapter. And so let me